Hi, I'm Basanta Paudel from Nepal. I'm representing International Institute for Sustainable Development in this regional workshop. What I see is it's good to link to different policy processes, the Sustainable Development Goals and the National Adaptation Plans as well as NDC, so as to enhance the effectiveness, efficiency and coherence among these policy processes for the better implementation of these different policy processes. If we do link these processes, then there is a room or opportunity to have a very good resource harnessing, so that the targets set out in the SDGs could be implemented. As well as if you look into the SDGs targets for Nepal, we have certain targets to achieve by 2030. In terms of adaptation, we have planned to come up with certain local adaptation plans for actions as well as climate smart villages throughout the country. But then those has to be implemented at the local level and also could be reflected in the national adaptation plans as well as NDC of the Nepal government in the adaptation section. So if we do implement those activities in the grassroots levels, then that could be counted in the SDGs targets as well as NDC implementation. So there is a clear-cut, strong linkages among these policy processes which should be strategically aligned, systematically aligned, so as to enhance efficiency, effectiveness and coherence among these policy processes. And also it demands some sort of coordination mechanisms within these policy processes that enhance the interministerial, interagency coordination for effective outcomes. As it has been explicitly mentioned in the COP's decision as well to formulate the NAPs. NAP is basically about identifying medium and long-term adaptation needs of the country, and Nepal is also marching towards identifying medium and long-term adaptation needs of the country, which is also anchored in the NDC documents of Nepal. If you look into the SDG targets, there are certain adaptation targets, as I mentioned earlier, that are also linked to the NAP. So those targets that are linked to the NAP could be prioritized under the SDG implementation as well, and that will be looked after by the climate financing portfolios to implement the SDG targets by the adaptation plan. But there are dedicated fundings for the climate actions within the United Nations framework conventions, but then there are not that dedicated funding entities for the SDG targets implementation. For if you say the goal number 13 of the SDG, that could be linked strongly to the NDC and adaptation actions, and also the national communications process. So that could be supported by the climate financing portfolios. But if you look into other goals of the SDGs, that might be deprived of the financing because there is no dedicated financing for the SDGs, and it depends mostly on the bilateral and multilateral funding support and also the domestic support, which in the time may not be sufficient to fulfill all the targets set out. But then having said this, the linkages or the alignment of these policy processes could help us find the entry points where we can work together and then help achieve the other targets as well as while focusing on implementing the NDC and NAP. In case of Nepal, Nepal pioneered in climate budgeting. In the year 2013, Nepal formulated a climate budget code within the national budgetary system. So they have come up with 11 criteria to flag the fundings that is allocated for the climate change, and it is basically the domestic funding as well as international financing that Nepal is receiving. So if you look into the recent climate change budget code of the government of Nepal, it's almost 30% is directly related to the climate financing. So it says that 30% also comes from the international financing as well as the domestic financing. So if you look into the detail of that climate financing, the country is coming up with financing the local level adaptation actions through its own domestic funding, leveraging domestic fundings in the local level as well. So so slowly and gradually Nepal is also marching towards localizing climate actions through LAPA and implementing through the domestic funding. And on top of that, the important funding for Nepal is the bilateral sources and also the multilateral sources and also from the convention as well that rely heavily on climate adaptation actions.